Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Huff, with co-host Eleanor Goldfield. Today on the program, we welcome back media literacy expert and scholar Nolan Higdon, certainly no stranger to the Project Censored audience. Nolan is a founding member of the Critical Media Literacy Conference of the Americas. He is a Project Censored national judge. He's also an author, a university lecturer at Merrill College and the Education Department at the University of Santa Cruz in California. Author of numerous books, as noted, including The Anatomy of Fake News, United States of Distraction, and many, many others. You can learn more at his website, which he'll be sharing with us in this segment today. Nolan, welcome back to the program.
Mickey Huff, what's up? What's up, Project Censored Universe? Glad to be here.
It is great to catch up with you. Of course, you can learn more about Nolan at his Substack. He'll be telling you more about where you can read his work online. Nolan, one of the things you've been doing since you started a new podcast this year called The Disinfo Detox, which is a fabulous program. You also are doing a newsletter called The Gaslight Gazette, ever timely. And we're going to talk about a couple of the features that you've been looking at in the past couple of weeks. From killing privacy to killing democracy, big tech's anti-human agenda. We're seeing more and more come out about Peter Thiel, about Curtis Yarvin, going well beyond the media's infatuation with Elon Musk earlier this year. Nolan Higdon, you also, of course, have a book called Surveillance Education with Allison Butler, where you look at what technology is doing to higher ed. Let's dive in here. What's going on with shouldn't we be embracing AI with all of our being?
Yeah, it's a really, it's a fascinating question you start out with there, because I think there's so much pressure in the United States, a country that is capitalist, that really prides itself on this, technologically driven notion of progress. And so whenever we think of media or innovations such as a smart device or AI or the internet, in America, we almost have like this knee-jerk cultural reaction to embrace it, that it's a sign of progress, it's a sign of success. And I think there is something to that, I'll be honest. I am someone who admires all these human inventions, and I do think there are ways in which they can make our lives better and, if not possible, easier. But the real problem with them is that they are very powerful, transformative tools that are owned by a handful of very powerful corporations who align themselves with very powerful elements of folks in power. Particularly the United States government. Right now, that means the Trump administration. We saw these big tech oligarchs lined up to be a part of Donald Trump's second inauguration. Folks like Elon Musk, Peter
Billionaires
Thiel.
Row.
Yeah, Andreessen. I mean, many of these folks have been a part of the Silicon Valley and funding of Silicon Valley and are now part of the Trump administration. And what's really hiding, I think, in plain sight is the disregard that these individuals have for democracy. That's very clear in the ways in which they undermine democracy consistently. We know this just by using their platforms, right? The community standards are never set by the community. The moderation of content is done in this authoritarian, non-transparent way. So I don't think too many folks will be shocked by the fact these folks, in practice, their platforms are anti-democracy, but they also openly sell it and celebrate it. There are thinkers like Curtis Yarvin, who was a major influence on folks like J.D. Vance, recently has been in communication with Elon Musk, who openly says he thinks democracy is an inefficient, antiquated idea. Folks like Mark Andreessen have, repeated this notion from Yarvin. So he's a very influential figure in being anti-democracy. And what I connected that to in the piece, it's not just these folks are anti-democracy, which I happen to be a believer in, democracy is the worst system except for all the rest that have been tried. It's also that they're anti-human. And, this is something that I really have to credit, the work of Yasha Levine for doing in his book, Surveillance Valley.
Yes.
Where he follows the cultural and philosophical origins of Silicon Valley. And if you really look at it, it's predicated on this notion that humans are bugs that need to be fixed. They're not smart. They're too emotional. They make mistakes.
Or insects to be squashed.
Exactly. And their brains have limits. And so we need to create things like Google to replace the human brain. We need to create, autonomous independent vehicles that aren't, able to be corrupted by humans. But of course, in all these situations, there's two problems. One, it's anti-human, which I mentioned. The other one is they're high on their own PR. The things they try to promise to create, they can't create. Silicon Valley and big tech have a long history of over-promising and under-delivering. So they make these big promises. The public buys into it because it's tech-driven, only to find out later that usually it's working against the user's interest and the interest of democracy. And so that's why I wrote this piece, because here we are on the precipice of doing it again with so-called AI.
Well, you also write, quote, Google, for example, was explicitly designed to mimic and ultimately replace the human brain. Decades later, research shows that using search engines like Google can have negative effects on the human brain. And of course, now when we see folks going to, not going to use Google as a verb here, when they go and do internet searches or web searches, the first things that come out is all this AI generated, potentially hallucinatory slop, as it were. Recent studies along the line here of what you were saying show that it's basically short-circuiting us. It's feeding into the attention economy. It's creating a lot of problems, and particularly both you and I, both as historians and professors teaching, how do we navigate this into the classroom? I know this is a huge topic I'm opening up, but skipping the tech and the surveillance and the data harvesting and these things for just a moment, and let's go to this issue of like the degradation of education, the degradation of the learning process, and potentially even the degradation of the human mind as a result of some of these technologies being wantonly blasted into everybody's computers and phones, whether they want it or not. Right? The Internet of Things. So whether I want my refrigerator to tell me how cold it is in there or not, it's going to talk at me.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. There's a lot of people out there who I think are avoiding AI, and maybe they have good reasons or not. That's not the point of my comment. The point is that you really can't avoid it. At this point, it's integrated into your phone. If you work in education, it's integrated in the learning management system. If you're driving smart cars, it's integrated there. I mean, you go around, you're not going to be able to avoid it, whether you want to or not. But back to your question about education, I think this is a real challenge that educators need to take on. And I think it's too often being framed as a question of like, are you using AI? Do you understand AI? And that's not what I'm necessarily saying to educators, although I think they should familiarize themselves with it. My point is, students are using it right now. And Gary Smith is really helpful in this regard. Gary Smith wrote the book, The AI Delusion. And he's long, basically messed with AI bots. He goes in there and purposely gives them tasks they can't do to prove how unintelligent they are. And so he was a big proponent of saying he doesn't see any time in the near future of these AI systems becoming more intelligent than human. But then he did say something interesting. He published an article where he said, he didn't say he called himself wrong, but basically insinuated he might be wrong, that AI may be smarter than humans faster than we thought. And I was kind of shocked by this, but I read the essay. What his point was if people aren't learning the foundational skills that you need to be a critical thinker, to have reading comprehension, to make original, compelling arguments, if they rely on AI to do all those things, well, eventually then, yes, AI will be smarter than the human population. And I thought it was a really fascinating argument because I think there's a lot of people out there who do have those skills and do use AI, and you can, read in, like you said, you're a historian, you can read an AI generated essay and you can point out what's wrong. You can fix the writing, you can fix this, that, and the other. People who don't have those skills just print that out and submit it to a professor. And that's the real threat, I think, that and challenge for educators moving forward is how do we convince young people that, look, you have to learn these foundational skills.
Yeah, analog intelligence, real life intelligence. Before we get to the artificial, how about we hone and develop those critical thinking skills, communication skills ourselves, rather than kind of have them swapped out, right? Curtis Yarvin's dark enlightenment, as it's called. I mean, just even the phrase, is kind of blood curdling in lots of ways. You're also right, of course, that we call it social media, and the industry has branded it as a way of social connections. But again, most of the social science studies and data on it show that it's created an antisocial society, and it's actually caused addiction problems and all kinds of other issues. It makes people, you write, isolated, anxious, record levels of depression in young people, right? This is pretty extraordinary. And then as you continue, you say big tech wraps its products in friendly words, right? So that's part of the PR, the propaganda campaign, smart and social. In other words, it masks the reality that we live, as you write, quote, in a surveillance capitalist economy dominated by the FANGs. That's a good one that we've written about before. For people that don't know, the FANG, F-A-A-N-G, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, where profit depends on erasing privacy and exploiting human behavior for the power and profit of a few oligarchs and their companies. Dark enlightenment, Nolan Higdon.
Yeah, I mean, this is why earlier I made that quip about how democracy is the worst system except for the rest that are tried from time to time. The system that they're proposing to replace democracy with is one that's managed by these systems. And the bait and switch is they like to convince audiences that these are objective systems that are only going to purely use logic and not be, swayed by whatever racism or prejudice of the day. Well, that's totally false. These systems are designed by humans. They do what humans do, tell them to do, and they reflect the bias they're humans. So imagine if a bunch of the rich, privileged, white oligarchs in Silicon Valley designed the systems for how to manage our world. There you go.
Yeah, well, this is certainly what they're calling for. And unfortunately, these folks were kind of lurking in the shadows for quite some time. I mean, obviously, we've been writing about them. People in media studies have been aware of that. People into tech maybe have been aware of it. But corporate media tends to cover these issues in a lionizing way, right? And they're so connected commercially with the big tech companies, and now big tech companies are all through the infotainment system, right? And influencer platforms and so on. And they've really been selling us a bill of goods, quite literally. And do you see anything on the horizon here? Do you see a crack sort of opening where corporate media are starting to be more critical, maybe of these people and these philosophies behind it? We just saw too recently Doge. Do you remember Doge? Seems like ancient history now. Apparently
the department that wasn't actually a department.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the non-department department, the undoge. Apparently uploaded all kinds of data from Americans where it can be hacked or visible. I mean, again, Nolan Higdon, what's your take on, are we getting I mean, obviously I'm going to submit that I believe that this would be too little too late, but are we scaling to meet these challenges? And if not, where do you see maybe some efforts where we're making some ground in that regard?
I don't think at this moment I can say with any real confidence that we're scaling to meet these challenges. You brought up the media. I think one of the interesting things about corporate media is the class solidarity there. I mean, they're always defenders of capitalist systems and other capitalists, in this case, big tech. I mean, you see this even, recently with Donald Trump buying a stake in Intel. The problem from the media's perspective wasn't that Trump is consolidating power, buying into Intel. They were mocking him for being a socialist. That was the word they used. Like he's Bernie Sanders, Imam Donnie. I mean, so that he's not being totally capitalist. That's their critique.
Not fascist, right? Not the merging of corporate state.
Exactly.
But the opposite. Well, some historical political parties co-opted the phrase socialist. I won't mention them out loud. But
and many people in the present still don't remember that and still don't understand that, so they think it's socialist regime.
Yeah, I mean, oh my. Well, I mean, we're idiocracy more and more every day, it seems. We're speaking with media scholar Nolan Higdon, and we're talking about a feature that he has, a bi-weekly dispatch from the front lines of the information war, and he uses a critical media lens to examine stories and narratives in the news. This is the Gaslight Gazette. Nolan, you recently also had commented on AI, deep fakes, war crimes, Epstein, and ICE impersonators, a big list. But before we get into all that, Sydney Sweeney broke the internet. So do you want to get? You have a pretty amusing line here. Do you want to get into any of this on the backdrop of what's happening? And again, between Taylor Swift and her engagement to the football guy, to Sport Ken, and these other. There's plenty of other things that are distracting us, including the Sydney Sweeney debacle, and then of course Cracker Barrel. Where would we be without that logo? Nolan Higdon, weigh in on some of the junk food news here and how we can cut through that here. And you do a good job with satire and some biting commentary in your Gaslight Gazette.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, funny you bring that up. I was actually thinking about how I wanted to ask you about this because you and I worked on junk food news for so many years, and this was really, I think, a prime example of the work we've done together on those chapters. But I sort of put a joke online, just a serious poll, like what's more important to you, the decline of democracy or the change of the Cracker Barrel logo? And it was, meant to be a satire piece to say, like, what are we talking about here? Like, how many of you even live near a Cracker Barrel? I mean, it's a regional restaurant. I mean, I was born in Kentucky, so I'm very familiar with Cracker
Yes.
Barrels. But it's a regional restaurant. But this is kind of this low-hanging fruit that the news media always seems to be able to find something that gets the attention economy. People feel for some reason passionate about it, and it ends up being a distraction for more critical issues. I mean, I'll say, as someone who's clearly aligned himself on the left of the political spectrum, I really don't care what Cracker Barrel's logo is. It's got to be in the millions in terms of my priorities, and I would imagine that's true for most people. And I think, what has happened here, though, to answer your question, and I think this applies to Cracker Barrel, Sydney Sweeney, and possibly even the way the NFL is kind of handling Taylor Swift's engagement announcement. They realize that the new economy is to go viral. It's to do something sensationalistic that absolutely stands out, that people will talk about and pass around online, and that's how you get attention to your brand. And I think that's what these companies are doing. I think American Eagle knew they were kind of pushing the boundaries tongue in cheek with that. They knew it would get controversy, and it did, and they got attention. And I think people forget, and they should know this because our president basically has lived by this the last 20 years. No attention is bad attention when it comes from the media, from the perspective of these companies and political figures. And so I think they've, hit a slam dunk that so many folks are talking about these things. And meanwhile, the media is trying to figure it out, not realizing they're actually a part of the problem.
Well, we have, we've really morphed into politainment, right? I mean, Trump isn't from The Apprentice. I mean, he's a quote unquote reality TV personality that was a real estate quote mogul. I mean, the hitting born on third base, saying he hit a triple. This is exactly what Carl Jensen was talking about when he coined the phrase junk food news. The more absurd, the more titillating, superlatives, right? As you say, and then there's no publicity is bad. They'll just spin it into ratings. They'll spin it into profits. We saw this happening, under the Biden administration. This might not be a popular thing to say, but it's not just that the corporate embrace of this right-wing, narrow view of patriotism. During the Biden administration, we all saw the performative wokeness. We saw brands jumping on board to try to, Black Lives Matter flags flying at places where they use slave labor. Or the NFL talking about ending racism when it's an institution that's been wrought with racism since its inception. I mean, it's pretty cynical overall. It seems like that there's a similar thing, however, driving both of these, right? And it gets back to the junk news culture, infotainment. It's completely infected the body politic. I would suggest then, therefore, this is why we need critical media literacy education more than ever. And we just don't have enough of it. There's almost 20 states now that are passing some form of need for media literacy education. But as you know, Nolan, sometimes it isn't mandated. It's not specified or specific. It's not what do you shoehorn it into phys ed? I mean, Nolan Higdon, speak to this issue, because again, you've written quite a bit about these issues.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on here again. Yes, the right absolutely, co-ops this iconography to drive home their narrative. Right, they're doing it right now with flag burning. Nobody's burning flags, but supposedly that's a major issue for them. Just like,
never mind the 1989 Supreme Court case saying that it's completely lawful First Amendment protected activities, but do continue.
Yeah, or shall we say the shoddy record on calling soldiers baby killers, but they always amplify that one. I mean, you can go down the list, right? But the left has its, own issues with this as well. And they also fall for the same sort of corporate co-optation. I mean, remember during COVID, Amazon had a Black Lives Matter banner on its website while it was firing a black man, Chris Smalls, for daring to organize the labor force in New York City in Amazon. So this happens on both sides across the ideological spectrum. And it's what prevents a lot of social movements, right? These movements get co-opted. So people were fighting for racial justice in the late 20-teens and early 2020s. They thought that the way to achieve it was to buy Nikes. I hate to say it, but
using slave labor.
Exactly. And it's always this capitalist promise that one day the market's going to deliver on those social justice goals. Just keep buying. It's right around the corner. You're one purchase away. Call now. And so
But
that's
wait,
kind of
there's more.
more. So that's kind of been the I think take. But to your point, what we can do as a public is really offer media literacy education as a counterbalance. Not to tell students that necessarily you shouldn't buy Nikes for social justice, but so they have the skills to ask the questions about the disparity between the reality and the rhetoric from a lot of these companies on these issues. And right now, we just simply don't do that. We toss these media bombs at students. We're like, let's just try AI on young people. Let's see what it does to their brain. Well, hey, let's put some smart devices in their hand and see how they grow up. It's this total like test. They're in there like a petri dish. We don't put any scaffolding to give them some sort of language or framework to ask questions about the devices. We just teach them to be mindless consumers. I think that is rooted in a lot of our problems, and it goes back, generations as well.
So Nolan Higdon, you write too, From Fake News to Fake Love, how AI is hijacking our reality. And you mentioned a startling statistic on social consequences of exactly that growing up. As Stanford referred to this generation as the digital natives. I'm not sure that's aged well. And certainly, yeah. But you write about how a recent survey found that more than 80% of Gen Z respondents are open to a romantic relationship with a bot. And we just saw recently MetaBot kind of deluded some person to go off on some mission to find them and didn't come back. I mean, so what's going on here?
I think there's a lot at play here. I think one of the things that these AI bots do really well is they make people feel really smart and empowered. And this is an age-old trick from social media, right? When everybody's on their social media feed, they feel like they're speaking the world, speaking truth to power, and that's why all these people have the delusion that they're actually changing the world. And AI, I think, really just continues that. It tells you that your questions are brilliant, that your writing is great, that you're thinking in unique ways. These are all mechanisms to keep people on the screen. Well, humans, we like that positive reinforcement. We want that from other humans, and often you don't get it. I mean, let's be honest, it's unhealthy. You should have more of a mix. But this gives it to you, and I think a lot of young people like it. That you definitely don't get that in the social media realm, from where it's flame wars and hate. A lot of people aren't getting in a society that's increasingly divided. So I think it's a comfortable place. Also, AI reflects your biases, so it really feeds back exactly what you want to hear, which is also what a lot of people want as well. And so if you're a young person, you're looking for things like connection, friendship, relationship, community, all the things that modern society has largely erased for young people. This seems like an alternative. And if you don't know what those things actually look like, it can be quite attractive. So I'm not surprised to see so many young people at least open to the idea.
Yeah, it's fascinating to look at, and I don't mean that in a flippant way. I just mean that even as like we're in the water, we're the fish in the bowl trying to notice the water, right? While we're breathing it and seemingly drowning from it somehow simultaneously. You write in the conclusion of one of your recent Gaslight Gazettes that the pattern is clear. AI is churning out fake news, fake relationships, and fake realities. While tech leaders race ahead with no concern for the fallout, the public stays in the dark, lawmakers do nothing, and a tool with vast potential is being weaponized to exploit people and erode democracy. What started as political misinformation now seeps into identity, health, and even human connection itself. So again, that's just wrapping up some of what you were just saying, Nolan Higdon. What are a couple of prescriptions that you might have for these young people that are looking for these things, and what are some tools that we can provide that help them navigate this or escape it entirely, which is an option, but increasingly far less, as we mentioned earlier, because this stuff is everywhere.
Well, I think I would also go with the macro too. So I'll talk about the micro level, but at a macro level, I think we need to do a better job as a society creating some sort of regulatory framework about where AI does and doesn't belong. And I know a lot of conservatives are eye rolling at me right now when they hear that, but my point is that these devices can't do the things that their creators say they can do. And in fact, they complicate things, they create problems, they've been found to hallucinate things and blackmail. And yet we're using them to make critical decisions about like sentencing in the courts or job applicants or qualifications for admission to universities and on and on and on. And I just think a lot of lives are going to be, irreparably damaged if we continue to integrate this. So I'd like to see the public push back on that at the macro level. at the micro level, I think we need to have, a conversation with young people. I don't think it does anybody any good to be afraid of inventions. As I point out, any invention, for example, a hammer isn't necessarily dangerous. It's who we allow to control the hammer and what we let them do with it. That's when a hammer becomes dangerous. And I think the same thing goes with AI. And so I would remind young people when they're using AI because they think school is boring, they want to get it in school, or college is boring, they want to get it in college, they want a job. Yeah, maybe you can use AI to get your way through college, and probably with the way they've reduced the standards, you probably can. But once you get out with that degree, you have to get a job. Let's just say that the job, you do get a job because you have the degree. You then have to be able to perform the job and keep it. Eventually, the world is going to figure out that you don't have the skills or content knowledge to do the work. You're not going to be able to have the skills or knowledge to participate in the democracy. A lot of the human connection, a lot of these things are going to be lost. And there's not a lot of time to go back and get them. And so I would encourage people to save themselves a lot of trouble and not go into debt and tuition costs to basically get a degree that's worthless.
So, Nolan Higdon, we're going to wrap up this segment here, but I couldn't help but think when you referenced the hammer, and I know that in class that's often a useful thing to bring up, invoking Abraham Maslow from the mid-'60s, and I'm not going to open up a can of worms of other things going on with Maslow. But the law of the instrument comes to mind, right? If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail.
Right.
And AI is the hammer, and we're getting nailed. So, Nolan.
Yeah, and that's an important point as well, because the cultural transformation that happens. I mean, right now, a lot of old people are rolling their eyes at young people. All these young people do is toil away online and brand themselves, and they all want to be influencers. Well, that's the world you handed them. Their major mode of communication were these devices that were predicated on markets, selling things, selling yourself. This is the way they know how to communicate. This is the world they know. And I think we need to really ask ourselves, what's the next generation going to look like when it's raised on AI?
Well, Nolan Higdon, as educators, part of that is we need to help people come to the realization that, sorry for the cliche, another world is possible.
Yeah.
Other worlds are possible. And I think the process of really trying to persuade younger people to think independently, think critically, understand the usefulness of tech tools, but the limitations of them, so that they can spend time developing other parts of what it means to be a human being in a purportedly democratic society. Nolan Higdon, share with us a little bit of information. Where can people get more information? Where can they read the Gaslight Gazette? Where can they hear the Disinfo Detox? Nolan Higdon.
Absolutely. So you can get my Substack at nolanhigdon.substack.com. And for folks who know what a Substack is, basically I write a post, and if you sign up, it goes to your inbox whenever it's published for free, and you get it right there in your email box. If you got a couple extra bucks, you can also become a paid subscriber. It's like $5 a month. It helps a lot. Would really appreciate it. But if you can't, if you don't have the money, just become a free subscriber and give me a comment, like, share. That helps as well. And then I also host the Disinfo Detox, which you can find on all the major podcast platforms or at youtube.com/@disinfodetox. You can find that there. And of course, I'm on all the social media platforms, and my website is nolanhigdon.com. And look forward to seeing you, Project Censored Universe.
Nolan Higdon, thanks so much once again for joining us on the Project Censored Show. We'll likely have you back on again, as we do, to get regular updates looking at current events and politics through a critical media literacy lens.